I'm delighted to introduce our next panel, which I will be moderating. So by the way, good timing because you started this panel, Charlie, 10 minutes early, so we've just hit it right on time. So hopefully our next panel will also be able to finish slightly earlier to move on to our networking lunch with Moldovan wine tasting. So can I please introduce our speakers? Georgi, Vasil, Owen, please do join me on the stage. And we have the wrong slide on the screen. We do have a wrong slide on the screen. Okay. So the previous panel focused quite a lot on the macro, and you heard obviously from the central bank, EBRD, IMF, on what the prospects are for the region. I think for this panel, our idea was to drill down a little bit and actually hear from the corporates, from the horse's mouth about what's coming for what's next for Moldova and for Moldovan economy. So I'm delighted to present the speakers here, Georgi Shagidze, who is the CEO of maib, Vasil Tofan, who is the chairman of Purcari Wineries, and Owen, sorry, I forgot your last name. Yes, who is the CTO of Endava. And we're going to talk about their businesses in Moldova and what their perspectives are. So maybe in terms of introductions, maybe once I ask the first question, if you could kindly maybe introduce yourselves as well a little bit more, and also your businesses. So Georgi, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about maib and how you approach creating a modern financial ecosystem in Moldova?
Sure, and thank you. Thanks for the question, and thanks everyone for being here online and in person. Now, in 2 words about myself, I joined maib in February this year. Before maib, I was CFO of TBC Bank, which is listed here on the premium segment for 10 years. And before that, I worked across many banks, including Barclays, here in London, in Dubai, back in London, and so on. Just before I start about maib, I want just to highlight few macro numbers that the previous panelists have gone through, but the ones that are very important for banking. Number one, this is clearly low debt to GDP environment with a very stable currency rate, and this is very important. And the fact that there is active integration with European Union, with up to 70% export going to EU, 60%, up to 50% import from EU, 600,000 Moldovans having the EU passport. This is very important when we speak about the actual integration. And I go to see my customers, corporate customers. Many of them manufacture goods with the tags already on the goods for the end user European consumer. So that there is a real everyday on the ground integration with European Union, and this is much bigger than it seems from the first look. So that's to start with. Then when we go to the banking sector, few numbers here are very important. Capitalization is very strong. We are about 20% in total capital. Now, liquidity is very strong. Liquidity ratio for our bank, for example, is about 48%, like super strong liquidity numbers. There were questions about dollarization, especially in the context of mortgages. Dollarization or eurozation in mortgages in our bank is quite close to 1%. So this pretty much does not exist. There is some euro book which is mostly incorporated. So this is very good foundations to start. When we go to maib, we are the largest bank in the country with the market share of about 35%, and if you think about the landscape of the banking sector, the next bank has about 19% of the market share in loans, and so we are 35. We represent more than 1/3 of the sector if we think about the loan market share, and loans does represent the positioning in such countries. We just now refreshed the strategy, and we want to build on our strengths and transform the bank. And the biggest transformation that we will be going through will be transforming the bank from traditional linear structure to more agile, more small units structure, whereby people will be working in small teams and focusing on the results. And we have tons of initiatives, as you would expect, but they can be grouped into 4 areas. Number one, this is we want to put the customer first and in the center of everything we do. We just did the brand refreshment. The brand you see here, we launched in 7th of October. We launched a new model of the branches. In the next 2 years, we will be changing all the branches with more transparent, more quicker services, where the customers get the service from one place, more open, more with new colors and so on. We are simplifying the procedures, and we really want to put the customer in the center, just not to say it, but in every decision we make, we want to put the customer in the center. Number two, this is important. These are our initiatives in the digital space. And here we already have very strong presence, but on top of it, we want to orchestrate ecosystems. We recently launched the marketplace for automobiles, and this will be advanced towards the firstly ecosystems, and in the future in the super app territory as well. So this is very important to become orchestrator of the ecosystems in the digital space in the country. Number three, this is clearly IPO, and this is the reason why we are here. At this stage, we have not launched anything, as you would understand, but we are exploring very actively. And number four, this is important, and this is the last, is to go to in the region with digital products and start offering our product and services. Firstly, to Moldovans who live outside Moldova, and that's where digital onboarding and all the digital procedures comes, and then we can extend these services to others as well. So this is very, very, very briefly about us and our aspirations.
Thanks, Georgi. And this is what the Prime Minister has been speaking about, right? Digitization, agility, but also, of course, your IPO consideration, which will have a lot of the impact on all the steps that you're doing right now in terms of governance, risk management, and all of those things that you will need to start putting into place from today. But I have all the confidence as you, knowing that you have a lot of experience bringing companies to the public market. Owen, I'll move on to you. So, of course, you represent Endava, the well-known provider of modern digital technologies. And I know that you have substantial business in Moldova. Could you tell us a little bit more how this all started and where you are today?
Certainly, yeah, I think it's a good story. So my name is Owen Woods. I'm probably the only person in the room who's not a financial professional. I'm normally in a room full of technology professionals with business people feeling a bit isolated. Now I know exactly how you feel. I have never been more thankful for the minor in economics I did in my software engineering degree, so I can follow the conversation. So we're a technology company. When we talk about digital transformation and digital systems, that's what we do. We build them for other people. So we build them for large multinationals. We build them for fintech startups here in London. We build them for people in Silicon Valley in New York. We build them sometimes for governments, and sometimes we build them for quite small companies who are attacking big companies. Moldova has been a very important part of the Endava success story. We're now well over 8,000 people and continue to grow strongly. Moldova's been part of that story since the very beginning. Endava was founded in London in 2000, mainly as a software consultancy company. So relatively small numbers of people advising clients, doing small amounts of high-end work. We very, very quickly realized, this was well before my time, I've been with the company about 7 years, but the company quickly realized it needed scale in terms of delivery of software, and it needed that at an affordable cost. It didn't want to go to existing large markets, and a company was funnily enough founded in the same year, although of course the people in London didn't know it at the time. A group of Moldovan software engineering experts who were also very entrepreneurial founded CompuDava in Chisinau in 2000. A couple of years later, the company that predated the Endava name, Concise, met CompuDava. The two came together, and Moldova became our first scale software engineering center, starting from very modest beginnings, with about 25 people, I think. It's now one of our largest software engineering centers. If you just think about that for a minute, the size of Moldova. Moldova is one of the smallest countries we operate in, and it's got one of the largest software engineering centers. And that tells you everything you need to know about the success we've had in Moldova and how important Moldova's technical professionals are to our success. Along with many other countries too. We have lots of people in Romania, for example. We have people in Latin America. We have people in Serbia. So we are in many countries, but Moldova has always been an important part of that. And why? Well, Moldova has a good supply of well-trained, highly intelligent, very determined technical professionals coming out of 3 or 4 key universities. We hire a lot of people from those universities. In fact, our staff go back and teach in those universities now. So we have strong links into a very strong university sector. We find that Moldovans are very, very keen to work with people from abroad in whatever working style they want to work in. And actually that's important. If you've worked with people from other cultures, you'll know that they would often like to work in their culture. We found repeatedly Moldovans are very happy to meet people halfway and work out the best way to work. And they're technically skilled, they're good problem solvers, and they're very determined people. And I don't know if that's a national trait or we hire the determined ones, but I can assure you, when we give the Moldovan Delivery Center a big difficult problem, such as recently we gave them a huge, very complicated system for a large international payments company that must remain nameless, they just simply took the challenge on head on and succeeded. There were a number of other delivery centers, I think, privately thinking, I'm very glad that went to Moldova. That really didn't look like a lot of fun, but they overcame, and they have done it many times for us in 20 years. So that's the short story of Endava and Moldova, and why it's one of the countries that has been very important to us, very dear to my heart. I love visiting Chisinau, and I miss it so much since COVID-19, but I hope I'll be able to go back soon. And what everyone says is true. They're very warm, lovely people, but they have fantastic food and they have fantastic wine. So don't miss out on an opportunity to visit them.
Fantastic. I mean, that sounds, when you were talking about the can-do attitude and the immense sort of, expertise in software technology, sounds really familiar. And I absolutely, I think it is not a surprise that you have, your biggest delivery center in Moldova. But also, I think that also develops into a new theme is, I think what Angela was actually touched on is, there are a lot of the areas outside agriculture that can develop. And one of those could be renewable energy, for example, solar power, could be, transportation, such as with ports, but also the software and technology. And we're seeing similar trends in the region, right? Across Eastern Europe, actually, where you see people, this enormous human talent really expediting, I think, the development of local economies.
Absolutely, right from, and not to take away focus from Moldova, but right from the Adriatic coast across to Moldova, we find that there is tremendous depth of human capital. Moldova being one of the great examples. Right,
Vasil, moving on to you, you have 2 hats. Obviously, you're an investor in Moldova through Horizon Capital. You're also the chairman of Porcari Wineries, which is, we've been talking a lot about the wine industry. So maybe we'll start with the investor perspective, if you don't mind. So from your perspective, what are some of the insights about, practical insights about your experience in Moldova, and what are your thoughts about its investment climate?
Yes, thank you, Iona. First of all, I really have to start by mentioning that the wine tasting is at 11:30 in the morning. I think having a wine tasting in the morning, that's the best selling point you can have for an event like this. So you are all welcome there.
It's 1:30 in Moldova, it's fine.
And it's almost evening in China, so we should be all fine. On a serious note, indeed, I wear several hats here. So maybe I'll start with the hat as a Moldovan investor. So I'm a partner with Horizon Capital, which is a private equity fund with a little over $1 billion under management, which is a sizable amount for the region we cover. We focus on emerging Europe region. I'll start by saying that we've done actually quite a lot of investments in Moldova. I counted it, as I said. So we've done 10 investments in Moldova over the years. And I'm very proud to say we never lost money in Moldova, not a single time. And typically we actually made good money in Moldova. And I understand we have regulators here in the room too, so I shouldn't brag too much about the returns we delivered. But given we have a pragmatic, occasionally cynical audience here of investors who are very, say, returns focused and risk returns focused, I'll say that typically we're returning over a typical holding period for a private equity fund, which is 4, 5, 6 years. We typically made on median 3 times our money, cash on cash in these investments. And I say this not to brag about our returns. I say it mostly that I think in many respects, Moldova has been one of the overlooked destinations. And maybe sometimes the media headlines didn't do justice to the country, because I understand it's always a juicier story to pick up some of, say, the more negative elements, the more kind of striking elements. But lots of lots of success stories have gone unnoticed. And I think the experience of our fund is a good example of that. In several cases, we've been actually so say excited about the results we've had in Moldova that we decided to back companies on multiple occasions. Maib is a good example. We've been an investor in the 2000s alongside EBRD. We've returned nearly 4 times our money during a, if I'm not wrong, like 5 years holding period. And 10 years after that, we decided to go for another investment, again, because we believe in the country, we believe in the bank, and we felt very comfortable to enter this investment alongside our partners from EBRD and Invalda. That's one example. So another example is the wine company we backed, and I think I'll share more about that story. Again, it's I think in the case of Purcari, you can bring to life some of the strengths Moldova has. So one of the strengths is indeed, say, the quality of the people and the relative low cost of doing business in the country. And on the other side, I think it's the quality of the people and the quality of the assets enables you to sell products to the world at a relative good pricing and enjoy some pricing power. And in the case of Purcari, for example, we've published the results today because it's a listed company. This leads to the highest EBITDA margin of any global wine company. So literally we benchmark ourselves with all the wine companies in the world, and we have the highest EBITDA margins worldwide. So in Q3, we announced the EBITDA margin of 38%. You'll agree probably there's not typically a consumer goods company has a gross margin, in the 30s, 40%, like a good consumer goods company. We are a consumer goods company with an EBITDA margin of 38%. You'll agree it's quite remarkable. And the reason we're able to do that is because, again, Moldova gives us kind of what we call the best of both worlds. We get the lower cost of operations in the country, but also are able to extract the quality that enables us to get the pricing power to lead to those margins.
Wonderful. And then tell us a little bit more about the wine industry overall. How does this work? Who are your major exporting partners, etc.?
Yeah, I'm happy. I consider myself to have the best job in the world because I'm a bit of a kind of a overpaid sommelier, occasionally waiter, which you're going to see just shortly from now. But it's a fascinating business, indeed, an industry. The kind of the running joke for the wine industry, and I'm a little bit embarrassed about this joke, is that how do you make a big fortune? How do you make a small fortune in wine? And the answer is that you have to start with a big fortune, and it's simply the reason wine traditionally was this quite difficult industry, to crack, and maybe because too many hobbyists went into it and so on. So it's a very fragmented industry. But what we've discovered is that with the right strategy in place, with the right delivery location in place, it can become actually a very, very, very good business. So in our case, we have our operations in Moldova and Romania. We're selling to the world, but our primary delivery market, so selling market, is Central and Eastern Europe. This is where we focus on. And I have to say that with pride, actually, as a Moldovan, that Moldova is a bit of a superpower in the wine world. I know it sounds very pretentious, but I'll just give you some stats. So Moldova has a comparable comparable acreage of vineyards with Australia, which is a continent, right? So Moldova is a tiny country, Australia is a continent. We have almost the same say acreage of vineyards. It has actually a comparable acreage of vineyards with South Africa and New Zealand put together. Again, both South Africa and New Zealand, big exporters, kind of well-known wine country names, and Moldova is comparable to both of them taken together in terms of the acreage. So that's the starting point. So it's a good, so it's a place where you have the raw materials. I think so. That's the basis for any successful wine business. The next is. The next is, of course, the country brand, and I think where Moldova has been struggling is indeed, we're not perceived as a say very well-known, strong country brand. And in that sense, I think the Russian embargoes we have two. We had one in 2006. We had another one in 2013. Was a blessing in disguise of sort. I think the vice governor also mentioned this in his allocation. So it was a blessing in disguise because. We traditionally have been shipping wine to the Russian market, but after the series of these embargoes, we decided that look, it's not the most predictable market to do business with, so we fully reoriented our exports to the European markets, and it has worked actually wonderfully for us. And I think Georgia is another good example of a country that managed to position its brand on the global wine markets. I'm looking now at Georgia with some jealousy, So just to give you a stat, so. Georgia is number 4 in the world in terms of the price per liter of exported wine, just behind Italy, but ahead of Spain and ahead of many other traditional wine countries, So Moldova is still at, say, the bottom of that ranking. So we're still exporting at relatively low price per liter on average, but the pricing power is increasing very, very fast.
Thank you, Vasil. And we joked, right? Georgi somehow always manages to stay close to the wine in Georgia, in Moldova, and everywhere you go. Okay, right, fantastic. So I actually, so with this, thank you very much for this introduction, in detailed introductions. I think I want to now open up for a discussion. I'll just have actually one question for you all, and then feel free to jump in and to comment. So the UK has just hosted the, as you know, COP26 summit, and ESG has been at the forefront of the agenda of many institutional investors, and including those present today and online. So I'd like to have this open discussion about various aspects of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and actually hear from you, how do you think these themes are developing in Moldova? So who wants to start?
Yeah, so from our perspective, the ESG, specifically starting with governance, when we have the ambition to grow, we are regulated business, to be listed is critical. And then again, in terms of the penetration, we are at 22% as loan to GDP and 4% as mortgage loans to GDP. So when you grow, it's clearly very important that you have proper governance, proper risk management. And our shareholders, and you all know, EBRD is committed to the improvement of the governance. On our journey to IPO, we will be doing even more. I think the other thing to highlight, which we have started, is the transparency and transparency in fee and commission structure. And then we are acting as the exemplary, and we will be improving on that front as well, because this is important that our customers, especially in the development stage where they do not have very good understanding of every detail of the product, for us it's key so that we explain to them the details, the payments of the financial products, including or starting with the loan. So this is where we started as the exemplary, and then there are many more initiatives to be added on this, but it's very important.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to comment on this. For us, ESG is not a tick the box kind of exercise. We really take it seriously, and it's also driven by, say, the kind of financial partners we had over the years, like IFC and EBRD, and other IFIs, but also the funds invested who are increasingly vocal about these issues. And we have some of these funds present today. But when even as a smaller issuer, when you have sophisticated funds like like Aberdeen or Fiera or Firebird, like East Capital, and Deutsche Asset Management and so on. So the list is quite long. Like you do have to take these things seriously, and actually we're feeling in a good way the pressure of further upping our ESG game. So I think in Moldova's case, still the focus is primarily on at the moment, and I want to be transparent about this, is the focus is on the S and the G side of it. And maybe I'll say now one thing that may not sound as very popular, but I think we still have to work a lot on the S side. So I'll give you a number that will be a little bit shocking to many of you, but I just checked the GDP per capita ranking globally, and still Moldova, a country at the center of Europe, fits right between Nigeria and the Republic of Congo, not the Democratic Republic, but the Republic of Congo still, So in that sense, like we're still a country that is truly frontier in the middle of Europe. So there's a lot of work to be done to raise the quality of living, to raise the standards of living. And yes, on one side, that's say maybe that may be perceived as oh my God, like a country in Europe that is just around African countries, but it also means opportunity. It also means opportunity to let the market work and help rise the social standards. And as for Kari, I'm very proud that we have thousands of farmers, many of them small farmers dependent on us for their livelihood. We have thousands of people, from growth speakers to like vineyard cutters and so on, who depend on their livelihoods for us. And this S translates nicely into G, because it's not easy to be a company operating in a agricultural segment and at the same time do things the proper way. So we pay all of our taxes, we are Big Four audited for over 10 years and so on. So I think we're also contributing to the G side. We cannot take shortcuts there. So I think that's also, I think we also, are helping for the entire sector, entire industry to transition into higher standards for S and for G. But increasingly, we really focus on the E side too. For us, that means using lower weight bottles. That means innovating with packaging. That means planting our share of trees. So really, I think when you have a 38% EBITDA margin, you can allow yourself doing some of those things. And again, it's one of the priorities we have to attract more of the ESG focused funds in our capital structure.
For me, ESG, if it's impactful and genuine, is simply a reflection of your company culture. Otherwise, there's a danger it's an add-on that has very little impact on the way the company operates. And culture is very, very important to Endava. We're a people business. Therefore, culture is absolutely key to everything we do. And we've always tried to build a very strong culture. One of the things that has struck me right across our Central and Eastern European countries is how privileged many of our staff members feel in their communities. They realize that they are largely living Western European lifestyles. They're working in Western European environments. For example, in Chisinau, we've got a prestige office block. It was widely featured in Central and Eastern Europe as the best office block in Moldova. I have no idea if that's true, but there was a lot of hype about it. And they are very aware that maybe their fathers or their uncles or their cousins don't have the same advantages. So a lot of our staff hold us to account on that the social impact that we have in the places we operate is very important to them. And that's great, because there's nothing like your own staff telling you you're doing a terrible job to make people sit up and listen. I think Endava's always had a lot of ESG sort of going on, but of course we became a listed company several years ago. So now it's quite a formalized process. We've got an ESG group. We had to have a head of ESG. I won't go into all the detail. If you're fascinated, there is of course a very comprehensive PDF in the investor part of our website you can refer to.
I knew you would say that.
But, especially as ESG is not my thing at all. I mean, we have a very skilled group of people who manage it for us. The one thing in Moldova, it's worth highlighting, is that if you walk into most software engineering centers in London, in Paris, in Germany, in New York, you'll be struck by something very, very quickly. What is it? It's all white men. In Moldova, actually, it's not like that at all. And it's because if you go to the universities, if you go to British universities, you immediately see the problem. It's lots and lots of men and a small number of determined women who will be outstanding superstars, you can tell, because they will battle through it. You go to Moldovan universities and it's half and half. And this is reflected in our workforce, and we're very proud of it. It's not just in Moldova, but it's particularly strong in Moldova. We have very senior women, we have senior technical women, we have women running centers, we have women setting policy, we have women in customer-facing delivery manager jobs. So it's only one aspect of diversity, but it is a very important first step, and that's something I think we're particularly proud of and strong about in Moldova.
Oh, and if I add, actually, the country is run by two women, and I think that also deserves some appreciation. So the president is a woman, the prime minister is a woman, and I think they're doing a fantastic job. I mean, they've been too modest, maybe to brag about themselves, but I think for the first time in 30 years, we have two women from a fiercely pro-European party. That the integrity of these women, I think nobody can doubt it. Very well educated, both Harvard educated, both high integrity, And I think for the frontier investors in this room, I think you probably know that the success of your investments in frontier markets, emerging markets, is largely about the strength of institutions and the strength of the policies. And I think with these two women in charge and a lot of men supporting them,
which is how it should be. I'm loving this.
And a lot of men supporting them, I think they'll be doing a terrific job.
As the father of an ambitious 16-year-old girl, I was heartened by your comment that the first three speakers were women. I immediately WhatsApped her a photograph. She was thrilled.
Well, I'm a co-chair of our Women-Inspired Network in the UK. So what you're saying is really close to my heart. So, and when we were brainstorming about this event, I think the biggest driver behind that was to showcase the female leadership of Moldova, which is, I think, absolutely remarkable and outstanding. So, and I think we're achieving this goal today. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And I'd like to move on to your views on the future outlook for Moldova. So some of the highlights and growth opportunities. For example, during the previous panel, we heard about the level of mortgage penetration and all of that. So maybe Georgi, I'll invite you to expand on that, and then we'll see if Owen and Basil also have something to say.
Yes. I think there was, even if we start in Moldova, so I think we have two important points to mention. One is the GDP growth itself, and then I think we can obviously always debate whether it is 10%, 5%, or more, but it's clearly impressive GDP growth, given where we stand and given the integration with the West and with EU and potential convergence of the living standards. So that's one. The second one is clearly the penetration, which we tried to mention. And in banking, again, as measured as a loan to GDP, mortgage loan to GDP, or any other type of loan to GDP, it's very low. It's 22%. I mean, for comparison, I'm coming from Georgia. Loan to GDP in Georgia is about 70%. And Georgia is not very different country from the immediate past perspective or aspirations perspective, or even number of population or GDP per capita perspective. So they are quite close. Mortgage loan to GDP 4%. I mean, this literally gives you a good growth opportunity. But I guess the bigger growth, and that covers all the industries, comes from potential to approach and sell your products and services firstly to Moldovans who live outside Moldova in European Union, and then the others after the integration happens. And again, 600 to 700,000 Moldovans have a European Union passport. Clearly, we can approach them. We can offer digital products and services. The word digital is very important, because clearly nobody from banking is going to go and invest in the heavy assets. It's more asset-light digital offering, and then extend from that. And the language. So if you consider the language, Romanian language in Moldova, and that gives us quite an advantage to offer these products and services in Romania. So when we think about the growth, this is the macro penetration story, and plus the opportunities to grow starting from Romania.
Vasil, you mentioned about the export and the diversifying away from Russia, thanks to some of the structural obstacles, but actually this being blessing in disguise. So what is your biggest market for exports? And then maybe just talk a little bit more about Romania and how you approach that market as well.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think it's important. Again, if we're painting this, say, caricaturistic profile of investors, kind of like pragmatic, cynical guys, like looking at these charts and trying to figure out where to allocate the capital, then they probably look at Moldova and see like 3 million population, like why bother, the market is too small. And in that sense, I think it's very important to realize that the most Moldovan companies consider Romania as an extension of their domestic market. And then suddenly it's not a 3 million people market, it's like a 23 million people market. And I think this is becoming the norm. I'll give you just a few examples. So for Porcari, actually, we consider Romania to be our domestic market. It's in that sense is by far the largest export market. About 55% of our sales are in Romania, and we feel in Romania as much as home as we feel in Moldova. I'll do another example. We've been investing in a company called Glass Container Company, acquired by Vetropack, the Swiss listed strategic, and Vetropack acquired this company as a platform for a Romania-based, game. So again, they made the investment not that much for the local domestic market, but as a platform for playing in Romanian market. Again, maib with Georgi, I think. First of all, I have to say, like, Georgi is just like a superstar CEO, like superstar, not in the sense that he's like in glossy journals, but he's doing such a fabulous job. He's joined us for only like 8 months, but he's made so much. And again, Georgi has very good experience with taking, say, franchises from a smaller country like Georgia in his case, and he led the expansion to Uzbekistan for TBC. And I think, of course, he's a very credible person in terms of, say, taking the maib franchise and trying to play on larger markets with a differentiating proposition focused initially on Moldovan migrants, starting with Romania. So in that sense, I think this, it really redefines the perception of Moldova as a market, because again, it's suddenly, so, it's not a 3 million, but it's a 23 million addressable opportunity. And I think that is just a much more exciting value proposition towards investors.
Yes, and you mentioned Uzbekistan. That's a huge, fast-growing frontier market, right? So that's really interesting. I think market to be expanding in. So we'll see. Maybe we'll see maib there as well, if you're not already there.
I think our target will be Romania, approaching Moldovans first of all. But from my past experience, I think incumbent largest player developing the digital ecosystems in their home country and exporting those ecosystems cross border does really work. Especially in our case, we will have the advantage of the language and people cultural being very close. So I think we will have lots of advantage of exporting those services. But again, it will be digital. It won't be asset heavy or with large investments.
Yeah, I like that. If I may build on that, and again, I'm just trying to throw some numbers there to get the people excited here. But I think this ecosystem play, I think you've seen it with one of your maybe most successful issuers in London Stock Exchange. Congratulations for that, by the way. But Kaspi, based on my calculations, represents, the market cap represents circa 14% of the GDP of Kazakhstan. Like, if you're taking those, if you're doing those ratios, and again, it's a big if, because we still have lots to go to build this ecosystem at maib, what Georgi is working hard on now. But like 14% of Moldovan GDP, that gets you to like comfortably above 1.5 billion potential market cap territory, even with the smaller GDP we have now, which is expanding itself very fast. So I think for a bank that has a book value of just north of 300 million now, and probably by the time we IPO, it's going to be a 400 million. It's still like, if you're doing your math, okay, I enter at roughly 1x book, but then it's like a 1.5 billion top opportunity. Then maybe it's a great investment, especially if the bank delivers 20% ROE as maib is doing.
And Mikhail Lamtadze, he actually joined one of our prior conferences a couple of weeks ago. And he's a chief ecosystem officer, and he actually, that's what he does. He develops the ecosystem at Kaspi, KZ, and of course today it's 27 billion market cap. It's kind of a representative of the value of digitalizing and bringing the digital assets and expanding the ecosystem beyond the home market as well.
Yeah, the Georgians clearly have a thing with ecosystems. So.
Yeah. And Owen, maybe you can comment on this dynamic of Moldova and Romania, and how do you view this Romanian market from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So we're a major software engineering employer in both countries. We do lots of delivery from both. I will give one tip to people who first start traveling to the region. Don't treat Moldova as a province of Romania. Politically, that goes down very, very badly. As you can kind of understand, if you've been in the UK long, you can imagine that referring to Wales as a province of England does not go down very well. Similar kind of things, but with a sovereign nation. So I have seen quite a number of people from Western Europe make that mistake. It can be a bit confusing because Eastern Romania is often referred to as Moldavia. So it can be confusing, but just as you cross the border, change your mindset. I found, I mean, actually the way I normally travel to Chisinau, actually I go in via Iași in Eastern Romania, because that's one of our delivery cities, a beautiful city in Eastern Romania. I drive across the country, I go in across the land border, I drive across to Chisinau. It's a very straightforward process. The two countries are very cooperative. We very, very regularly staff projects across the two countries. We are in quite a few countries. We're very sensitive to the fact that sometimes it's easier to staff projects with people from some countries rather than other countries. But certainly all of my observation of now 7 years is that Romania and Moldova are best friends. They get along very well. The people have got similar mindsets. Of course, there's a shared language for many Moldovans and Romanians of Romanian, although it's also important to just bear in mind that Moldovans also have Russian language skills, which can be terrifically valuable, has been for us on a number of occasions. But yes, we find it's a very frictionless process to get teams working across the two sites, or the many sites across the two countries.
So I think you mentioned that Romania is almost like a domestic market for Moldova at the moment. Are there any customs, tax, and legal obstacles to that?
No, and since 2013, Moldova signed actually the EU association agreement with European Union, and Romania being a member, of course, we have this privileged free trade agreement. And beyond that, so speaking for ourselves, let's say two companies exporting physical goods, Purcari and glass container, the process is actually very smooth. So that's why I say, like, we see it as an extension of our domestic market. And my understanding is that in, say, knowledge economy focused companies like Endavas, I think Owen's example is also very, very, very illustrative. And I've heard the word convergence today. So, many believe that Moldova, is where Romania was in pre-accession. So Romania joined the EU in 2007, and again, some of the people who kind of have the benefit of longer term time horizon and have seen the journey of Romania. Like many of my Romanian friends actually tell me that it feels now Moldova feels like Romania in pre-accession. So which of course makes us very, very excited about the potential.
Right. So I'd like to invite any questions from the audience. Okay.
Question to Georgi. Can you shed a bit more light on your strategic aspirations to launch an IPO versus a bond? First one, and second, if somebody asks you, do you not see this IPO as a way to escape potential challenges of the former shareholder who was stripped off of his shares, Mr. Platon?
So we have, and thanks for the questions. So we do have the very high liquidity, as you, I think, mentioned, and the system has very high liquidity. And clearly, with this high liquidity, the launching any euro bonds in the immediate future is not expected. I think IPO is something that we are working on very closely, and when we are ready, we will launch. But as you understand, this is the reason why I am here, and we continue engagement. On the other case, there is a case opened by the prosecution. I don't think I can comment on it, but I'm sure from the perspective of IPO and the brand strategy and positioning, it will be success story, not only for the bank, but for the business climate, because when from the small country, the largest bank does an IPO on a recognized, very strong international platform, this bank then starts acting as the gateway to bring new investors, to position the country well to the international investors. So this will be big story for the bank and for the country.
John?
If I could ask, so there was two really interesting surprises for me. One was the biggest vineyard acreage since apart from Australia or similar size, and the second thing was about the 8,000 people in Moldova that you're employing on the tech side. International.
I checked with my head of investor relations, and we are not meant to comment on the size of individual centres. But if I just say, you can, especially if you're a financial analyst, you can work out roughly the size of our centres. Moldova is one of our largest centres.
Okay. Has it created more competition in that some of your former employees left? Is there now a thriving kind of competitive digital scene, tech scene that you would identify?
Very much so. You can see it as a positive or a negative. If you're a software engineer in Chisinau, it's very much a positive. The world has, we had Chisinau, not entirely to ourselves, but we were the biggest employer by a long way for a very long time. And now, just as happened in Romania, we were pioneers in Romania too. Now, the world has finally woken up to the fact that those Moldovan software engineers that they met in London came from a city called Chisinau. They might have friends. So yes, I mean, undoubtedly, particularly in certain skills areas. And for example, you mentioned renewables. I mean, you can certainly see the potential that the same thing could ripple into other industries. But right now, the software industry, yes, we are seeing salary inflation, no doubt about it. But that's a very positive thing. If you're a software engineer, we are happy to pay people market rates. We always have been.
There was a question over there, and then the gentleman over there. So we'll start with you.
So, Georgi, could you provide any color on the IPO? For example, do you know what percentage stake you're planning to list, where it will be listed, stuff like that?
Sure. I mean, it's very early days, and clearly we need to take the appropriate decision by the shareholders. But I think what we would be expecting would be between 30 and 50%. And it would be maybe 1/3 primary, 2/3 secondary. But again, very initial numbers. We have not taken the specific decisions so far yet. Maybe beginning of next year we will be more precise.
Yes.
So I also have a question for Georgi. You mentioned a couple of times that maib is the biggest bank in Moldova, but at least two of your competitors have very large international banks behind them. And I'm just wondering, from a point of view of your position as the biggest bank, but competing against banks that have bigger banks behind them, what's your advantages in this?
Oh, sorry. Yes, clearly. So I think, I mean, in terms of numbers, maybe I'll say again, we are 35% of the loan market share, and then the next one is 19, then we come 17, and then 11. But clearly there are banks that have very strong groups and they are part of the international groups. But we do have our own advantages, especially the fact that we take decisions on the ground faster, the fact that because we are bigger, we can invest we have bigger scale, locally invest more. I think how we are differentiating ourselves is clearly focusing on the customer experience, on digital presence, and in both of them, we do have specific strengths. Our task now is to ensure that we build on the current strengths, and then we build the new strategy that I mentioned, or refresh strategy that I mentioned.
And if I may add now as a board member of maib, I think if you're looking at again, continuing this discussion about Moldova, kind of following the footsteps of Romania to some extent. You've seen what happened in Romania. So the local independent bank, Banca Transilvania, I think they gave a run for their money to all the internationals on the market. So if you're looking like where Erste Bank was in the 2000s and has been overtaken by a local champion, and and they're competing against like the who is who of the global strategic. I think Erste is there, Stationary is there, like Intesa Sanpaolo is there, like all the big guys are there, and still like they Banca Transilvania local champion won by I think by a big margin. And I think some of that is going to repeat in Moldova. And I think there's qualities in maib staying independent, staying hungry, not being part of some global kind of bureaucracy, kind of one of these like big boring banks. So I think there's also qualities in that.
So by the structure that you've seen in many markets, and I'm sure you know this. But then let's say in Georgia, the two biggest banks, they are Georgian. By the way, number two bank, it's Moldovan bank as well. So I think you still need in small countries local decision-making power, local relationship. And if you do it right, then you have lots of strengths to succeed locally.
We have a question from the lady here.
My question is for Mr. Tufan. So when will I be able to go on the local trial finance test? Take a Rosetta Pro card, very much of it, just as easy as if you go to Australia.
Okay. So you can.
Can I ask you the same question?
Okay. Look, thank you for the question, and I have a temptation to joke about it, but I'll give you actually a very practical answer. So you just type in Purcari, in a browser, and you can buy it from Amazon, you can buy it from transylvaniawines.co.uk, you can buy it from 8wines.com, and from many online retailers. I think, as again, speaking of this digitalization trend, I think many of the challenger companies like ours, we're leapfrogging the traditional retail and making a bet on online distribution, simply because it's less crowded. It's more open to wines from new countries like ours, and I think this is the right strategy to go. I think you have to pick your battles. I'm not going to compete against the Tesco private label and so on, and there's no margin there. So I think we're going the leapfrogging route. At the same time, because we do want to be in these sort of prestige locations. We are available in a number of prestige locations. For example, the walkie-talkie building. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure what the name is, but the walkie-talkie building.
That's the name, I think. I don't know any other name.
Maybe half a mile from here, they have this super fancy rooftop restaurant. And if you open the menu there, you'll have like a good selection of Purcari wines. They're going to be expensive, but I think given the fact you're at this event, I think you can afford it.
I'm loving this. Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah, if I may return to Georgi, there was a question asked that seems to contrast the IPO with the idea of issuing Eurobonds. Are you ruling out issuing Eurobonds in the near future?
No, I mean, in the short term, let's say 6 months, let's define this. I think we have more than enough liquidity. You would never exclude the possibility of issuing Eurobonds, but I think given the fact that we have very strong liquidity, it would not just make sense for us to spend money and time for issuing Eurobonds. But if you take the longer term picture, these things tend to change very frequently, right? So you think that you have very high liquidity, and then one day you do the focus and you don't, and then you start you start exploring what you can do. By the way, last week we did sign the agreement with EFSE related to the subordinated loan, which is somehow funding part as well. And this is the subordinated loan per current regulator standard, which is very close to Basel III, which clearly with all the strict measures of Basel III. And then this is also supports our funding, but also supports our capital optimization. And I'm happy to say that this is first time that I'm hearing on the market to.
And it's a local currency.
Yeah, exactly, it's a local currency, which is even more important. Thank you.
If I may, another one to Georgi. He mentioned the loan to deposit ratio, I think, of 48%. Is that a sign of limited opportunities on the market, or you're extra? Why is it so low?
So the good question. So I think I mentioned liquidity ratio 48%, which is very high, and we have lots of cash. When we deploy this cash in the loan, that will help our margins and our growth, and will simplify our growth story. But the loan to deposit that you mentioned, it's very good to highlight. The country's penetration in loans is 22%. against GDP, and penetration in deposits, it's higher, it's 44% against GDP. So loan to deposit is about 60%. This is the very strong, very good place. Anyone you take in the region, whatever is the criteria to define region or peer banks, peer countries, sorry, you would have, this is very comfortable place to be.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering again to Georgi if I could ask regarding the penetration going forward. So from the bank's perspective, we've heard how you plan to grow your portfolio, but are there other constraints in the country, in particular with mortgages, in terms of the suitable housing stock, sufficient housing stock, in fact, to lend against, and on the corporate side, in terms of collateral by firms to provide against the asset facility? So what is your take on this?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think in terms of the housing, we are seeing the quite good developments and constructions in the country. Maybe we should see more over time, and with the increase of our mortgages and the increase of the integration that we are talking this morning, this will increase, and we see our customers already exploring this. But good news is that we try to implement the framework where to see that are we in the bubble or do we see the rapid price increases, and taking this framework, which is on our site, by the way, under our investor presentation, we see that it's neutral. So even though there is a slight pickup in the pricing and the rents, the rest of the criteria is very neutral. So it's very comfortable from the risk and growth perspective to be. In terms of the collateral, this is a very good question as well. Especially for SME, yes, there is sometimes lack of collateral as you would have in any other country. There are special programs by the government, including EBRD and IMF, to somehow support through the funds the SME customers for who do not have collateral. We may see further programs. Yes, they will need some support, but this is the case in any other country. For corporate, I wouldn't say that there is anything very specific to flag.
Just one question from this one. Were you just? It wasn't. You didn't raise your hand.
No, sorry.
Okay.
I have a question for Ellen. In terms of, so we're hearing about labor shortages everywhere. And I'm wondering, and as an employer and a relatively large one in Moldova, and maybe you guys can comment on it as well. And what is that environment right now with so many people being able to leave to work in EU? How difficult is it to find qualified people in Moldova right now?
I have to say that finding the kind of software engineer we're after, who's skilled, good with people, well educated, easy fits into our culture. I mean, that's difficult everywhere. That's difficult hiring in Bogota, Colombia. It's difficult hiring in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's difficult hiring in Berlin. It's difficult hiring in Bucharest, and it's difficult hiring in Chisinau. But actually, if you look at the growth we've managed to have in Chisinau and continue to have in Chisinau, it's perfectly achievable. It's about creating the right employer environment. There's two main things for why we believe, or people tell us why they continue to work for Endava. One is the fact that we're very long-term thinkers in terms of people's careers. Quite a lot of our competitors are quite transactional. They need them for a project. If there's another project at the end, that's great. They'll continue to employ them, but there's no guarantees. We hire people hoping they'll retire out of Endava. We're not quite an old enough company that's happened very often. We've just had a few, but that's our view. They're with us for careers, and we're continually investing in them. We're moving them between projects deliberately, so they're getting better experience. The second reason they come to us is the quality of projects and the scale of projects they can work on, which are Western European, North American, leading edge, large projects. Whereas a lot of the work that is placed in Moldova, especially in the smaller firms, is actually relatively small, relatively mundane projects, and they can get much more interesting work, much more stretching and challenging work by working for Endava. So that's how we, as well as all the hygiene factors of great office space, good environment, paying people well, making sure that people have good social events, making sure that we make sure the hardware is up to date. You know, there's a lot of stuff you have to do. The two things that seem to make the real difference of those.
Maybe I can also, from our perspective, it is clearly, yes, it is clearly difficult, but I think the advantage we have also is that we have access to the other markets around, and because of the location, I think we have a few very good specialists from Ukraine who have joined us and who are joining us. We are working closely with few Romanian companies who also support us, and have also are searching in Belarus. So on the one hand, yes, on this location is a disadvantage for the perspective that people living easily, but on the other hand, you also have access to the other markets. That's how we are from the banking trying to solve this.
Yeah, on my side, I'll add, I don't sugarcoat it. I think it's a challenge. And I think we count on the fact that also, say, the government and the policymakers are going to be receptive to this challenge. It could, one, say, concern I have, which is that the good news may further aggravate the challenges. And the good news is that many foreign powers and institutions want Moldova to succeed. We already see the money starting trickling in. We expect much more money to come. If you look at the example of Armenia, I think after Pashinyan's victory, 2 months after the victory, you know, EU announced a package of $3 billion for Armenia on a 5-year time horizon. So 3 billion, that's 25% of Armenia's GDP. So my view is that Moldova, again, without making any ranking, I think Moldova is at least as equally important to EU as Armenia. So we expect those structural funds to come. Now the question is, when this flood of money comes, of course, at some point the labor shortages will aggravate, you know, because you'll need people to go build infrastructure, you'll need people to go build, you know, schools and water pipes and so on. And I think in part the solution is going to be tackled by our respected national bank regulators who've been very consistently, you know, pursuing the inflation targeting mandate. But at some point, you know, probably raising the rates too much will not address some of the sources of inflation, which is going to be on the labor supply side. And there, in my humble view, the solution is further liberalizing the labor market, you know, removing you know, ideas, out of the box ideas, as removing, you know, residence permit requirements for foreigners, you know, for example, like in the neighboring areas of Ukraine or even Romania, removing like working permits for foreigners and so on. I think this, who knows, like politically, this may prove maybe not very popular, but in terms of, say, sound policy that may address the labor shortages, I think we'll need it. And frankly, if we think of ourselves as a sort of like little Singapore of the Eastern Europe that wants to trade both with West and East, at some point you'll have to liberalize those things. And really, I think labor is one of the big concerns I have. Don't want to sound too dramatic. I think it's a concern everywhere, but you know, but we need to also, I think, to take some progressive labor reforms to address them.
By the way, we have the job fair today in the evening.
That's why. So we're doing our part. We're doing our part.
Yes, we invited Moldovans who work here, and just want to persuade them that they should return to the country. And then this diaspora is a very good advantage. So, but because if you do what we are trying to do from the bank's perspective, I'm sure that we will be interested company to be joined. I'm sure the same goes to any other company. The same goes to the government. So there's clearly opportunity there.
Okay. Any more questions? I don't think we have any more questions. So with that, I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for your insight, and I'd like to bring this event to a close. Thank you very much. So I won't be doing any closing remarks, so very happy to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.